Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. My name is Amy Block. I'm the Executive Director for Catholic Charities, and we serve the entire Diocese of Sioux City. I think this might be the furthest point, southern, right? Southeast point. I've never been here to this part of the diocese before, so it's nice to be over here. And I brought my daughter Caitlin with, well, I don't know if brought willingly. She was thought I like to bring her along sometimes, but just to share a little bit about me and my background, I've been with Catholic Charities about 9 years, and prior to, as the executive director, and prior to that, I served as the vice president of clinical services for Jackson Recovery Centers. And if you're familiar with that, they're a addiction and mental health program in Sioux City, Iowa. And I grew up in Marshall, Minnesota. It's a small town in southwest Minnesota. And got my, you familiar with Marshall?
Grew up in Canby.
Oh, Canby, sure, absolutely. Yes, we're neighbors. And got my degree from Morningside and my graduate degree from University of Nebraska, Omaha. That was a master's degree in social work. And I really have always had a passion for helping people, and I ended up at the diocese. I'd done some consulting work for them, working with some of their management staff, and was very happy at Jackson Recovery Centers. I was the vice president. I was working with the CEO at the time, Kermit, in some succession planning, and really planned to spend the rest of my career there. I've been there almost 20 years. And when I found out the position was, well, I didn't find out, I didn't know the position was open for the executive director, but a friend of mine who worked there said, you know, the position's open, you should apply. And I was like, no, I'm content where I am. I'm good, you know, I had been there, and she was like, why don't you just apply? And I thought, well, I guess I have nothing to lose. So I went and I had an interview. Bishop Nicholas was there, and there were about 7 other people as part of the committee, and it went really well. And I knew it went really well, and so the next day I withdrew my application. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna do this. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call from Royce Raniger, if you know who he is or not. He's the CFO for the diocese, and he was part of the interview committee, and he said, Bishop Nicholas has been praying on it, and he's been praying that in hopes that you'll reconsider. Well, if you're all Catholic, you maybe have that Catholic guilt thing, and I thought, well, how am I going to say no to at least having a conversation about it? My grandparents were Catholic up in Owatonna, Minnesota, a farming community. My grandma loved Mother Angelica on EWTN, always had it on. I mean, there was so much Catholic guilt saying, at least you've got to consider and pray on this, which I did, and really believe that I was called to do this work at Catholic Charities. And the passion that I have and my faith has only been enhanced and grown since my time at Catholic Charities. And I'll share a little bit more about that and my faith towards the end of the presentation. But when I was asked to come over here and talk about mental health, it's something that I've always done presentations throughout probably the past 30 years. But what I'm going to share with you tonight, and I'm going to share a few statistics, because sometimes you share so much, you just kind of, you know, numbers and blah, blah, blah. But mental health is really become a crisis, I think, here in our community. And I'm going to share a lot about our kids and what's happening with them, but also with adults and specifically seniors and what we're seeing in rural Iowa. And I hope that you are able to take the information with you and that it's given some meaning to you and the people, maybe you personally or people that you love and your community. We have got a very small group, so I would say if you've got a question, just throw it out or raise your hand or just interrupt me. I have no problem with that at all, okay? And I have a clicker, which half the time I'm able to use successfully, and the other half I'm flipping all around. So let's hope that it goes okay. So why are we here? Here's some data. First, over here. So this is data on rates of depression with 12 to 17-year-olds. In 2004 to 2007, 7% of our kids were diagnosed with depression. 2016 to 2019, 16%. Look in 2021. 30% of most of our kids diagnosed with depression. A third of our kids, okay? In Iowa, 29.4% of adults showed symptoms of an anxiety or depressive disorder. That was in February of 2023. 18 to 25-year-olds with a severe mental illness increased by 50% after COVID. In our country, this was in Iowa as well, in our country, 15 million American adults have social anxiety disorders, and 13 is the typical age of onset for social anxiety disorders. I want to talk a little bit, some pieces of data with our kids, and I think it's important that we have some data to support why we're talking about this. This is in 2021, the CDC did a huge study on our kids. 40% of high schoolers felt so sad or hopeless they couldn't engage in regular activities for 2 weeks in the past year. That's almost half of our kids. The data is even worse for girls. 60% of females had persisting feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And of these 60%, 25% of them had a suicide plan. 18% of high school girls experienced sexual violence. So girls still in high school by another person. So that could have been a boyfriend, that could have been a family member or a stranger. And the last piece of data, in Iowa, suicide is the second leading cause of death for our kids. The first is car accidents. This red line was during COVID. This is from the Poison Center, which captures data in the US. These are suicide attempts of kids aged 6 to 12 years old, younger and younger. And this is total cases per week by age. This is over 250 cases per week that they were seeing during COVID. Kids aged 6 to 12. This was age 13 to 19. This is over 2,000 is this number. And you can see the line here. This is 1,500. And where they saw peaks, we're doing these 4 key periods. During spring break, Easter break, summer, and went back to school. And what those 4 things have in common is what? Change. Change and lack of structure and connectedness, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Any thoughts or comments on any of this? I see your faces. It's pretty startling, staggering, right? So the thing I want to point out, going back to this data, that I think is really important. In the mental health field, we really talked about and thought that COVID was a big reason for these dramatic spikes in so much, especially with the data we kept seeing with girls. What they've really found is that it's not necessarily COVID, because the data spike has really been in the last 10 years. And when you think back 10 years ago, what was the big change 10 years ago? I don't have mine here. Yeah, smartphones. My daughter just raised hers. Smartphones, social media, and kids having these. That was the big change. And that's what they believe is causing this huge impact on mental health with kids. In fact, today, which I haven't read all the details, I read just a small portion. The Surgeon General, I don't know if anybody saw on the news, came out, I see a head shaking, news about the concern they have for kids. Before they were saying middle school, now they're saying no child should have access to social media or a phone until into high school. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the causes of mental illness. So we know it's made up of several different things, okay? An imbalance of brain chemicals. So these are 2 brain scans, okay? These are actually of adults. So this is a brain scan of somebody with depression, and this is no depression. So you can see in the one with no depression, this is the brain lighting up, and this is dopamine. These are all the things that make you feel good, right? Spending time with loved ones, a beautiful sunset, hearing music, hearing your grandkids who are playing, things that you love and enjoy. So our brains light up because it feels good. We experience joy. This is somebody with depression, and you can see there's hardly anything lit up. Okay, so we know that something's going on with the brain. And so that is oftentimes why antidepressants or medication can help, because what it does is it helps activate some of these. I'm not a science person. Who was talking about they were good in science? Somebody was mentioning that earlier. You were. trivia anyway, maybe, right? Okay, so the neurons, it helps reconnect these so that the imbalance isn't there, so they can experience some joy. Okay, genetics. If it runs in your family, it increases the probability. It doesn't mean you're automatically going to have depression or anxiety or other mental health issues, but it increases the probability if there's other factors. Okay? Life events or serious loss or chronic illness or stress. Okay? Which we're going to get into, some of our kids experience online bullying or cyberbullying. Okay? Those are life events that for kids are very traumatic. Trauma. So we know now that trauma is much more than we thought it used to be, although it can also be overused, that word, so I'll play both sides. Okay, we know that trauma can be being in a war, right, experiencing that. Trauma can be being neglected as a child and the impact that has on you later in life. We know that now mothers who are pregnant, if they experience trauma, that trauma is relayed to the unborn child. Okay? So we know so much more now about what trauma looks like. All of those things can impact somebody being diagnosed with mental illness or causing mental illness. So I'm going to talk about 2 different common diagnoses: depression and anxiety. So some signs and symptoms. Signs are things that you see on the outside. Symptoms are what an individual is experiencing on the inside. And they often look different between men and women, and also between kids and adults, okay? So I'm going to try to, as I'm going through these, point those differences out that you might see. So fatigue, the sleeping too much or too little, that's very similar among all, okay? The overeating or loss of appetite, again, those are kind of the extremes. You start to see these in people. The headaches or the unexplained aches and pains. So when an individual starts to all of a sudden tension, the tension, the stress. You often hear this more in men, and this is, I know it's stereotyping, at the same time, it's also more accurate. It's accurate for most, not all, okay? Because society has taught men not to express or talk about feelings as much. So they come in presenting often to doctors more often, and that's how they describe it, okay? More physical ailments. You also might see this in little kids. Oh, my stomach hurts, I can't go to school, I don't want to go to school, okay? Some of that is because they, as young kids, might not have the words to describe. Kids that don't have the same vocabulary or ability to do that. Crying spells, that's often how we think about somebody who's depressed, okay? That's not one of the most common symptoms, or signs, I mean. Withdrawal from others or loss of motivation, somebody who all of a sudden starts to isolate or pull away in a relationship. and anger outbursts. That specifically is also with men. We tend to see them being more angry, okay? Thinking about what typically is underneath anger is almost always a secondary emotion. Fear, sadness, depression. Again, we don't really allow men in our society to be that vulnerable because it can be perceived as weak, especially in older men, because that's a very generational thing and how they were raised. You also might see that with teenagers, anger outbursts. So symptoms, the sadness, anxiety, guilt. Okay, feeling very irritable on the inside and not knowing what to do with it. Mood swings. This feelings of hopelessness or helplessness. And that's where when you start to hear somebody use words or phrases that sound very hopeless, or I can't do anything for myself, or there's no hope, or there's no way anything's ever going to get better. Those are red flags. Those you want to key in on when it's somebody that you love. Because that's a progression. That's a step towards somebody thinking nothing, and if nothing can get better, why go on living? Which we're going to talk about suicide at the end of the presentation. Self-blame, very indecisive, and there's the thoughts of death and suicide. Now with teenagers, it can be really hard to know, is it depression or are they just a normal teenager? This is part of being a teenager. That's normal childhood development, especially when you're in age 14 to 15, even into 16, a little younger, a little older. Every kid is different. This is called right here, just put teenager, and here it is, right? For any of you who are parents. Okay, so how do you know what's what? We talk to parents all the time who don't know. You're looking at severity and persistence. How persistent? So are these things going on very consistently and persistent for a period of time? Okay? So depression and anxiety are like cousins. They go hand in hand. Anxiety often can lead to depression, and depression can trigger anxiety. You need to be more worried about depression when it comes to suicide. That's more concerning than anxiety leads to suicide. Okay? So I'm just going to quickly go through anxiety. Signs: being clingy, hiding or isolating, destructive outbursts, repetition of action, and you often see this with kids. What if? Do you have older kids? I'm not talking about little kids who do this, but which it can be if if they don't grow out of it. But what if? Well, what if I don't get my homework done? And you respond to them, say, well, you give them an answer. Well, then I guess you're going to get in trouble from the teacher. But what if the teacher says this? And you give them a response. But then what if this? But then what if this? But what if this? Okay, that's anxiety that's talking. Okay, that's a sign of it. Symptoms: they have racing thoughts that don't ever stop or turn off. Worrying about multiple things that are irrational. That to us, you're like, why would you worry about this? Why are you worried about a test you're going to have in your final that you're going to have in 3 months? You haven't even had the test for this week, okay? A lot of tension or aches, difficulty sleeping, tight chest, shortness of breath, and rapid heartbeat. When it leads to panic attacks, oftentimes the individual thinks they're having a heart attack. Any questions at all on that so far? Okay. So I want to get into a little bit with kids and social media. And what really is the impact? What really is happening out there? And then what can we do about that? So 40% of girls and 20% of adolescent boys spend 3 or more hours a day. This was in 2021, so that's 2 years ago. That's a lot of time when you think about they're in school for 8 hours a day. Cyberbullying is more strongly correlated with suicide attempts than face-to-face bullying. And why is that? Okay? Because you can't get away from it. You think about so I'm 51, when I was in school, you know, if that happened, then you get to leave at the end of the day and you go home. Everybody kind of forgets about it maybe, or maybe it lasts a little bit and then it's gone and done with. And you get to escape from it for a while. When it's online, it is right there in your face. Multiple people are involved, people you don't even know, and they're now commenting on it, and it's there forever. Okay? So if I wear a shirt to school that somebody thinks is ugly, and one person comments on that I look fat in it, one person, and then everybody else decides to tag on to it. And then what if a boy does? That's even worse to my 15-year-old self. And then there's boys I don't know who are friends with this boy and they don't know me at all. So they're gonna say even worse things. And that's there forever. Okay? And it's out of sight from adults. There's no one on the playground who's paying attention to this. Who can say, hey, that's enough. There's no principal I can go to and report it. So it is much, much different than what we experienced as bullying. So this thing with phones, as parents, when our kids get into trouble, we often say, you know, if you don't do this, or if you get into trouble, I'm gonna take away your phone. Okay, that tends to be our reaction that we wanna do. The thing, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about why that is, taking the phone away may not be the best answer. I'm gonna talk about why. The pressure of social media is something I think that we really can't really understand, and I think that is part of the struggle with adults and with kids. What's interesting is what happens is that the more depressed and anxious somebody is, the more time they spend on social media. And the more time they spend on social media, the more depressed and anxious they become. So it's like this vicious cycle that they can't get out of. There's this thing called FOMO anxiety, fear of missing out. So if I'm on Snapchat or Instagram, or there's some new ones that I'm not even aware of that kids are on, and I see everybody's at a party and I didn't get invited, that feels terrible. So now I feel sad, I feel depressed, all of those things. So now I'm gonna keep following all these posts, all these chats that are happening, that everybody's talking about this party and how great it was, or going out for dinner without me and how great it was. And the more I keep doing it, the more depressed I get. And that's the cycle. Does that make sense? The other piece is this impact on body image and this ideal. And so there's this increased body surveillance on what girls specifically have with other girls and what they look like. And let me tell you, you can really doctor yourself, as we all know. We see it with models, we see it with movie stars. You can do anything to your body with these apps on your phone. And so they're doing that, and there is this heightened pressure for our girls to look a certain way. And so you take that with this social media, and then we wonder about these high rates of our girls being depressed, thinking about suicide, and completed suicides. That's the correlation with all of this. I am gonna get to the part where we can do something. There is hope, so don't worry, okay? All right, we're gonna shift gears a little bit. We're gonna talk about sleep and mental health, okay? Let me back up first. I did want to talk about one thing. Maybe it's not here. The one thing I did want to say about this also correlates with adults, because we do see this with adults as well. The pressure to be perfect. You see families, people posting these pictures of the perfect family vacation, or you see a mom with her 3 perfect toddlers all the time on Facebook, right? And what you don't see is behind the scenes, which is the 3 hours of crying and stress and the disaster of a house that went into that. And so I, as a new mom, let me tell you, when I was a new mom, I didn't do it very well. My first year of having my child was extremely stressful. I didn't enjoy any of it because I was so stressed out as a new mom. And I was an older mom. I struggled. It was really hard. And thank goodness I didn't have Facebook back then. That's the impact social media has, though, on people. And if you're susceptible anyway to depression, or social anxiety, or anxiety of any kind, that's where it can create problems for people. Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about sleep. So sleep and mental health. It's more than just, of course, you need sleep. Because if you're tired, then you're more sluggish and all this stuff. There's more to it than that, and we're finding out more and more about this. So here's our sleep cycles. Okay? So you start to get sleepy, start around 5. And what happens in here, this is like between 5 and 11 p.m. Melatonin is the sleep hormone. Okay? You can buy melatonin to help you sleep if you need help, okay? So it's actually a hormone that's natural that we all have. So, what's interesting, in teens, that doesn't start until about an hour later than in adults. Interesting, right? Okay. So what happens for all of us is the blue light. So blue light, that's something that most people are familiar with that by now. The blue light is the light that's given off on our phones or on computers. Okay? So that blue light suppresses melatonin, which disrupts our sleep. Okay? No, I'm guilty of it. I'm one of those ones who, when I go to bed, I like to relax. I like to look at Instagram, relax, and check on my emails at the end of the day, and then I turn off and go to sleep, okay? Which is bad, and I teach on this, okay? But it's something I'm striving for in this next year. Okay, so it can disrupt your sleep, which frankly, I don't have great sleep, so maybe I should pay more attention to this. Okay, so then 12 a.m. So the big dip, our energy is at its lowest, okay? Between 3 and 7 a.m. This is just our natural circadian rhythms I'm talking about. Okay. So depending on your internal clock, you might not feel fully awake until 9 or 10 a.m. So natural rhythms, okay? Between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., your body temperature rises throughout the morning, so your alertness and sharpness increases. And then this afternoon slump between 2 and 5. Okay, you might crave a snack. In your adult years, you'll see this energy dip earlier from 1 to 3. This is just natural circadian rhythms. Again, every person's a little different. Some people say they do better at night. Some say they do better in the morning. So that's how we train our bodies. Okay, the big part I want you to take away is what that blue light does and what it does to our melatonin. So in thinking about that, what happens when, this is specific to teens, it affects, and I'm not going to go through these in details, but your cognitive performance, it actually increases obesity, it leads to mental health issues. Teens who sleep 6 or less hours a night are 3 times more likely to suffer from depression. And that's important because we know that specifically anxiety, as well as depression, is diagnosed as a teen. right? So sleep in your phone, really? Yes. One of the things that can happen, and I don't know if anyone ever does this, but people wake up in the middle of the night, I gotta check my messages. Huh?
Oh.
No? That's good. Or you wake up at night and you can't sleep, and so you look on your phone. It's one of the worst things that you can do, for multiple reasons, okay? With our kids, this is that fear of missing out. What's happening right now? Okay? And we have this social norm that we have to respond to people instantly. Okay? So the moral of this story is, which we're going to get to, is for us to role model that, for us to pay attention to what our bodies are saying, which is take the time to let our bodies adjust to not having that blue light, to letting that melatonin do what it's supposed to, so we can have sleep. Because, I mean, sleep, which everybody talks about, and I say me, many of us are not so good at doing. Okay, so we're going to get into parents, grandparents, community members. What can we do for our kids? And then I want to make sure I spend a little bit of time on suicide. When it comes to social media, it's really important that we monitor our kids without being intrusive, which means limiting screen time, being friends with them on their apps, and normalizing the discussion. So part of it is, and I'll share one thing that we did as parents was, ever since our daughter was young, was saying, when you get a phone, and after you have a phone, we're always going to be looking at your stuff. Always. And it's not because we don't trust you. I don't trust your brain. Because your brain doesn't fully develop until in your mid to late 20s. And you're a good kid, but you're going to mess up. And you're going to make bad decisions, and that's your brain. Because your brain, the part that weighs out consequences with kids, that front, I think it's temporal lobe, front cortex, okay? That part isn't developed at all as an early teenager. The part that says, I really shouldn't sneak out of the house to go to this party because I'm gonna get in big trouble and there might be alcohol and drugs and I really don't wanna do that and I might feel peer pressure and that can be da-da-da-da. That part of that brain isn't developed. So I, as a parent, want to normalize from a young age that I was going to be in her business, and not because it was anything other than I knew her brain wasn't going to be developed. And so that's made it really easy for us to do that. It is normal. And so when I hear parents who love their kids very much say, oh, I'm not worried about them, they're a really good kid. That has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with kids being really good kids. For adults, stay off your phone an hour before sleep. What can you do for adults? And self-care. Self-care isn't about taking bubble baths. That's not what self-care is. It's not going for necessarily long walks or reading a book. Okay, those are relaxing and that's great. Self-care is paying attention to your body. It's paying attention to, ooh, I notice I have a lot of tension in my neck. Is something going on with me? Okay. Self-care is making sure that you're not giving to everybody else and not taking time for you. It's about having balance in your life. That's what mental wellness is. That's what self-care is. I did a retreat for the deacons. They had their retreat day. And so I did a presentation for the deacons, and we were talking, I always am putting plugs in for self-care, so I told them I couldn't let them go until I did. And I said, part of what we all need to do better, and them in particular, because I get to work with some of this, is learn to say no. And they're like, well, we can't say no. I'm like, I'm giving you permission. Bishop Nicholas was sitting there, and all the pastors, some pastors were there. They're like, we can't say no. I'm like, I'm giving you permission to say no right in front of Bishop. And they said, so I can say no to my pastor who's sitting right here? And I said, yes. Yes. You can't give all of yourself to everyone else every day before yourself. I know that's not what God intended. The other thing are protective factors. Being connected to other people. Our kids need to feel connected. And making sure we're providing them health education. And by the way, I'll let you know, I'll share this PowerPoint too if anyone wants any of this information. I want to share one other thing before I move on to the piece on suicide, because I want to make sure we have time for this. See, I told you I get to the point with this clicker that I forget which way to turn it. Okay, these are some great things to have a conversation with someone else about mental health, or really anything. So do some things. Ask, how can I help you? Tell them that you want to hear. Be patient. And keep in touch with them even if you don't get a response. Oftentimes we say, let me know how I can help. Most times people don't say they need anything, right? Okay? But keep following up with them. I think the don'ts are the better ones. Don't tell them how they should feel. You shouldn't feel depressed or sad because of that. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. Don't jump in with solutions. Man, this is a hard one when we care about people, because we really know what they should do to fix it, and we're really good at giving advice, right? Well, aren't we? I mean, we know the answers. We know what they could do to make it better. You know, you should really start going for walks every day. It's so nice outside now. It would really help. You should really talk to your pastor about that. You shoulds. Okay, here's the thing. Think about advice you've been given before. Is 95% of it stuff you've already thought of yourself? Or that you know would help you? That's not the issue. That's not the problem, okay? So for most people, listening, validating, I hear that you feel really sad. I hear that you feel really worried. I'm sorry you're struggling with that, period. That's what most people need. They already really know what to do to fix it. They're just not able to for whatever reason. Okay? All right, so the last piece I want to talk about is suicide. This is the most uncomfortable for most people and the hardest. Also, I think the most important piece, if I leave you with nothing else today. Girls attempt suicide more than boys, 13% versus 7%, but boys succeed more often. And that's the same with men, not just boys. So women attempt more, men succeed more. 4 times more successful. So, risk factor. If there's a history of suicide in the family, or if you know someone who died by suicide. Now I underline this because we really changed the language around suicide. It used to be if someone committed suicide, right? So when you say it in that way, it sounds like somebody, it's negative, right? They committed, they chose to take their life, they chose to leave you. They're selfish. When somebody died by suicide, it's like they died because they had a heart attack. People who die by suicide, and of course in our faith, we don't believe in suicide. At the same time, I'm very grateful that in our faith, we've also become more empathic and understanding about mental health. And that for some individuals, they've gotten to the point where because of their mental illness, they have seen that there's no hope for them. That's what they feel because of their mental illness, and that we don't judge that. And so when we say died by suicide, it shows that we're empathic and we understand that. So there's a myth that if you ask that of someone, it puts the thought in their head. Research has shown that is not true at all. If you think somebody is thinking that, they probably are. And so if I say, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? It's not going to make you start thinking about it. What it's going to say is, I'm open for you to talk about it and maybe prevent you from doing it because I'm a safe person. I'm going to listen and I'm not going to judge. Self-harm means they're suicidal. That's another myth. So someone's cutting on themselves. This most often happens with teens. Doesn't necessarily mean they're suicidal, but if we don't address it, it might be a mistake. They might cut themselves too deep, and it could lead to death. So what to watch out for? Extreme behaviors, which we talked a little bit about. If someone starts giving away prized possessions, and what I want to talk about, I shared some of these statistics up here, and we're seeing it more and more with teens. We're also seeing it more and more with older adults in Iowa in rural areas. 2 years ago, rural Iowa farmers had the highest growth rate of completed suicides in the country. In the country. So, and part of it is, good old Iowan farmers, we don't talk about it. You might see an obituary for somebody, and it's not in there. So it's really, really important that we know what to look for in people and that we talk about it. There was an obituary. I would never have known that it was somebody who died by suicide in Sioux City, and he actually lived in Chicago, but he had family back home. He was in his 70s. He had just recently gotten remarried and had kids and grandkids in Sioux City had come back to visit, and he died by suicide. Of course, there's nothing you would read about in the paper. You would never have known, except I knew somebody who was friends with the family and shared that with me. Had a suicide in our community. 2 of them, these were young adults in their 30s. One was a female who was married, had 2 small kids, very successful, husband very successful. He came home and she had died by suicide. So again, we really have to be paying attention to this. Talking about seeking revenge, that's more with probably young people or young men. You might see that. Looking for a way to kill themselves. If you notice somebody maybe men went to buy a gun, okay? Or women, oftentimes you might see with pills or hanging themselves. We're starting to see that more with women. And starting to talk about suicide or wanting to die or those feelings of hopelessness, okay? Okay, so what can we do? What do you want to do? There's 5 steps. Watch out, paying attention to those changes. Okay, extreme behaviors. If you notice with kids, grades, straight A student all of a sudden is getting D's and F's. Missing work. Okay, somebody you notice who just never missed work before, but they start to do some of that. Isolating, or somebody who starts to abuse substances. Because oftentimes what we might see is it might be an overdose, or somebody who maybe didn't mean to overdose, but did. And here we go. Ask. This is so hard for people. Saying, I care about you. I'm worried about you. This is what I've been noticing. And saying, are you thinking about killing yourself? And using that word, not, are you thinking about hurting yourself? That's what we want to do. We want to say that, not killing yourself. Because that word is really hard. You want to use that word because, again, you want them to think that you're safe for them to talk about. If it's too hard for you, get support from somebody else who cares about them. Okay? Maybe there's a couple of you who need to talk to somebody or to talk to them. Okay, let's say that they do. Then it's like, then what? Then what do you do? Okay? So then the next step is, okay, they say, yeah, actually, I have been thinking about it. Okay. And this is something any one of you can do. It does not take a professional. Okay? Okay, how would you do it? Okay, well, I've got my guns locked up, or I have a bottle of pills in my gun cabinet, or I'd probably hang myself, whatever it is. Okay. So then, well, do you have those things here? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If they do, your job is to figure out a plan to get rid of them right then and there. Okay, well, could we bring those things over to your parents' house for right now while you're feeling that way? Okay? Make that plan to get rid of them. If they don't, okay, and that part's covered. They don't have to. Okay? Being there, listening. Okay? So tell me why you're feeling that way. Tell me what's been going on. Listen, just be there. Again, you're not going to say, oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Why? You have so much going for you. Right? Oh. Okay, we're not there to judge. We're there to listen. Help me understand why you feel that way. I'm here to listen. I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you. Okay? That's what we're there to do. Then, you're going to connect them with a safe person to make sure they're not alone. Okay, you're not going to leave them alone. Okay? What if they say, you can't tell anybody? You absolutely can't tell anybody. Sometimes they might want to say. If you tell anybody, you can't tell anybody. What do you say? I'm sorry, I can't do that. No matter what. You don't keep secrets. That's part of why they're probably feeling the way they are. I love you too much, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tell everybody, but I'm not going to do that. Okay? Then you're going to make sure that they're going to get some help. Okay? If it's continuing down that path. Sometimes you might have somebody say, I've had those thoughts, but it's more like I just wish I wouldn't wake up the next morning. Many of us have had those thoughts before. Like it's just too much. But no, I would never do that. I would never do that to my kids or my husband. Okay, well, if you do ever have those thoughts, I want you to know you can talk to me. And maybe you need to go get some counseling. You need to go talk to somebody. I'll help you. Okay, and then it stops there. Resources. If it's a child, a school counselor, a parent, sometimes they're not comfortable talking to a parent, but you should always tell the parent. Trusted adult, a doctor. Sometimes people feel comfortable talking to their doctor. If you're not sure where to go, just Google mental health provider. I will tell you at Catholic Charities, even way down here, we have offices in Fort Dodge. We can do telehealth therapy with people, okay? But if nothing else, get on that smartphone, find somebody who can help you. Any questions about that?
How is the 988 number working?
Yeah, glad you caught that. So 988 is the new national suicide hotline or crisis line. So, and that's a great resource. I'm glad you mentioned that. So when 988, it goes to, I can't remember which agency here in Iowa is managing that, but it goes to an agency here in Iowa, and anyone can call. And what happens is it's a trained counselor of sorts, where somebody can talk to. It can also just be a mental health crisis, and they'll work with them, they'll talk them through the crisis, and then connect them with resources in their community. So it's going pretty well. I hope that it gets beefed up a little bit. Some of the other states have done a little bit more where they'll actually go to where that individual is, which I hope Iowa will get to that spot. But right now, they're doing a good job answering the phone and connecting people.
It's fairly new, right?
That, it's probably I think it was July 1st, I wanna say.
Okay.
So, a little less, and I don't think Iowa was right on the mark, but it's probably been at least 6 months. Yeah. One thing that they found is that Iowa farmers are not using suicide hotlines, and they found that they were very similar to veterans. Because they found that about veterans, because, and so they developed the vets have their own suicide hotline, because they found that veterans were like, they don't understand what I've been through. I want to talk to somebody who understands my experiences, what I've been through. And so they developed their own hotline, and now it's being used. They've done a great job with it. So they're finding the same thing with farmers. And that the experiences that farmers have had with different things like financial problems, it's a family farm, I feel the pressure to carry it on, or we might be losing the family farm, or I don't want the family farm, or those types of things that they don't feel that somebody, a counselor who has no background or understanding in farming would understand, and so they're not utilizing it. Yeah. So here's my last slide, make it okay. So this is a hashtag, it's something the state of Iowa has used to help try to destigmatize getting help for anyone who struggles with mental health. And it kind of comes full circle a little bit to where I started off with sharing with you about myself. So it's been 7 years ago now, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, and which I'm in full remission from. But I ended up having to go through chemotherapy and surgery and more chemotherapy and radiation. And it was all, you know, it was a stressful and difficult time for myself and my family. And at the end of it, a couple months after is when I really emotionally felt the impact of that. And so as a result, I participated in some group therapy and some individual therapy to really cope with how it had impacted myself and my family. And it was a very important thing for me to do for my own mental health. And so this Make It Okay, and the reason I share that with all of you is because I think as much as we can, it's really important to help others think of mental health like physical health. Just as if I was giving you a presentation on diabetes or heart disease, and I might share my healthy eating habits with you, or why I choose to go for walks every day, which I probably would if that's something I did. I think it's equally as important as that we share about mental health. And we share if it's something, and I'm not gonna go out and share the details of any of that with people, or, you know, I think it's important that we have boundaries around that. But I think it's important that we make it okay for people to be able to talk about mental health, mental wellness. And as much as we can do that, anything you can share about whether it's the presentation today, or even if it's things like, I've had loved ones in my life who have struggled with mental health, and they were able to get help, and now they're doing better. It makes it easier for other people to do the same. And so that's the end of my story. And I hope that if there's anything we Catholic Charities can do to support you all, your community, that you not hesitate to reach out to us. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.